Sometimes sports and life in general is all about the wouldas, the couldas, the shouldas, and it's about the breaks you get and the breaks you make, or the breaks you don't get and the breaks you don't make. And sometimes life just sucks and throws a huge monkey wrench into your grand plans and says, nah, up yours. And when I see this happen to certain people, I can't help but feel really bad for them. Because I say, how unfortunate, or what a shame. When I think of Jaylon Smith, the linebacker from Notre Dame, the junior coming into this 2015 college football season, there was a lot of buzz about him, a lot of hype about him. Talk about a potential top 10 pick. And to sit there and go through the entire regular season unscathed, only to get to the bowl game against Ohio State and suffer a devastating knee injury that puts perhaps his 2016 season pretty much in doubt, and maybe even his entire NFL future in doubt. My heart goes out to a guy like that because I saw the potential and I saw what could be and see what could still potentially be. But no, ultimately, that sports and life in general can be a cruel, twisted type of world, and there is not justice sometimes. And guys that don't deserve bad things to happen to them have bad things happen to them. And when it comes to Jaylon Smith, it's going to be very interesting to see where he ends up going in the 2016 NFL Draft. In terms of before we talk about the injury and the effects and the long-term repercussions of it, let's talk about the football player, what I actually saw on film from him and in the games the past couple of years at Notre Dame. What I really liked about his game: quickness to burn, speed to burn, a really, really athletic linebacker. Whether you play him outside or whether you play him in the middle, he fits there because of that athletic profile, his quickness, his speed, his lateral ability, and his lateral agility. A guy that can go sideline to sideline, as I talk about so often now as well, from goal line to goal, from line of scrimmage to goal line, excuse me. He's got that ability, a guy that you can utilize in coverage, in zone coverage. He's a very smart football player. In man coverage, he has the athletic ability to keep up with running backs, to keep up with slot wide receivers, and maybe even with a lack of size, still be able to be effective man-on-man against tight ends. A guy that played with an intensity and a passion consistently. A guy who played with, to me, a relatively nonstop motor. I always felt when I was watching Jaylon Smith play for the Fighting Irish the past couple of years that I was getting his best, that the Irish were getting his best every single game. A guy with a tremendous football IQ. You can see the instincts. Talking about awareness, that's one part of it, but I think instincts are another. Awareness is knowing what's going on the football field itself during the actual play. And that's important. The play recognition skills, that goes into awareness, knowing where you are, where you need to be. To me, instincts are having an innate, natural feeling of knowing what's going to happen before it actually does happen. And to me, when it comes to the linebackers in the 2016 NFL draft class, Jaylon Smith has the best instincts out of all of them by a good margin, with a great motor. A guy that's effective as a blitzer, too, in large part because of his quickness, because of his speed. You could bring him as a weak side blitzer off the edge, and he could cause some problems. He's also a guy, because of his awareness and because of his instincts, he can be an effective blitzer up the middle, even at all of a whopping 225 pounds. And, leadership. You saw him. He was a field general for the Irish on defense the past 2 years. He was the guy that set the defense. He called the plays, made the changes. A guy that you could tell the players on that defensive side of the ball really gravitated to and really got behind. This was a guy, a lot of this top 10 talk was completely legitimate, even with some of the questions about him. Now, don't get me wrong, you're talking about a guy 6'1", 225 pounds. So you have some concerns about his size and his strength, even though I think he's got good length for his relative lack of height, 6'1", 6'1.5", maybe 6'2". But again, that size issue, that lack of strength, even though he plays physical, and I think he plays bigger than he is, there's still some concerns about, I think, at the NFL level, even if fully healthy, his ability to anchor inside against the run, his ability to effectively shed blockers. At times, I think he also isn't the best fundamental informed tackler that you would like to see, especially for a guy that can have a nose for the football like he does, that can put himself in the right situation and right position so often. I would like to have seen him, especially in 2015, be a better finisher as a tackler than he was. And I think a lot of those fundamental issues come into that lack of size and that lack of strength. He's a guy that I think you can blow off the ball as an offensive lineman. He's a guy that once you get your hands on him as a blocker, you have a tendency to be able to wall him off of the play if he's not careful. And then he has trouble at times wrapping up bigger players just because he's not as strong as he needs to be. And, injury or not, this is something that Jaylon Smith was going to have to work on at the NFL level. And if anything, it's going to become even more important for him to hit that weight room and hit that weight room hard to strengthen up his upper body and in particular his lower body. One other concern I have just in terms of watching his games the past couple of years, he could be a little susceptible to handling double moves poorly. And I mean this more so in terms of run support. Here's a guy that can be so quick and so fast to fly to the spot that he could get a little out of control with himself, and he could get a little off balance and out of position. And as a result, for a guy that is that athletic with that good of change of direction, change of pace, he could get burned a little bit more often than he should have handling double moves. But ultimately, when we talk about concerns to his game, like I said, I talk about the film and everything else. It's all going to come down to that gruesome knee injury that he suffered in that bowl game against Ohio State, where it wasn't just about a torn ACL. Now it's talking about ankle damage. Now it's talking about nerve damage. And these are the type of things that make people wonder if he can ever play football at a high level ever again. And it's just tragic, and it's just really sad. And I'll talk more about this here in a moment. In terms of an NFL comparison, I kind of racked my brain about it for a little bit. And I'll tell you the guy that I ultimately came up with as I was watching him more and more. I look at Patrick Willis, who went to Ole Miss, played his last year of college with a club on his hand, went in the first round to the 49ers back in 2007. There were questions about his size, questions about his athleticism. I don't think there is many questions about Jaylon Smith's athleticism, obviously, but undersized linebackers that are really, really good athletes. Like I said, Willis coming out of Ole Miss, people didn't realize how good of an athlete he was. I think because in part they didn't actually watch Patrick Willis play. They just assumed 6'1", 230 pounds. They didn't think because of all the talk about instincts and feel and awareness and tackling that he was a great athlete. Until he went to the combine and ran a 4.50, and then everybody's like, oh my God, Patrick Willis is a great athlete. Like, duh, you didn't freaking know this? But two really phenomenal athletes with quickness and speed to burn, guys that have the ability to play sideline to sideline and can play in the phone booth, although I think, again, Willis was better suited in the phone booth at that stage of his career coming out of college, coming out of Ole Miss as a junior than Jaylon Smith was, even fully healthy coming out of Notre Dame as a junior. Guys with tremendous football instincts and a high-level football IQ, really good leaders, the type of guys that you want to have as the heart and soul of your defense, as the quarterbacks of your defense, the guys that you sit there and build your defense around. It's what the 49ers did with Patrick Willis. They built their defense around him. And in a lot of ways, I see Jaylon Smith as a similar type of player. High-effort type of guys, great leaders, like I said, guys that you always feel like you're getting their best from them. And overall, I look at Jaylon Smith, and to me, he was a guy that if he didn't have the bowl game happen, he could potentially have been a top 5 pick. He most certainly would have been a top 10 pick in this draft, and there's no question about it. And it would have been merited, and it could have been justified for sure. And I think based off of what you saw out of him on film the past couple of years at Notre Dame, here's a guy that could play weak side linebacker in a 4-3. He could play middle linebacker in a 4-3. And I do think, similar to, let's say, a Ryan Shazier, who came out of Ohio State, now plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers, even at 225, 230 pounds, could play inside in a 3-4 because of the special athletic traits that he possesses. Jaylon Smith, to me, a guy with Pro Bowl potential. I still think if he's healthy, Pro Bowl potential. I mean, he's a special player. But ultimately, it all comes down to that devastating knee injury. You're talking about not just having to recover from an ACL, which is one thing. And while recoveries from ACLs have gotten quicker, and they've gotten better and become more effective, it's still a serious knee injury. You miss a lot of time with that. Now to throw onto that the potential nerve damage that is there, What are the long-term consequences and repercussions for that? Now, people will talk about Marcus Lattimore and the multiple knee injuries that he suffered, including the one he suffered with nerve damage, talking about how he couldn't really recover from that. And that's got to be a concern, although this isn't exactly the same situation because, again, Marcus Lattimore had a lot of damage to his knee, where Jaylon Smith really, for all intents and purposes, caught one bad tear in one bad break. It's just when you hear about the reports at the combine about how Jaylon Smith's leg looked and it didn't look good and people thought it looked terrible. You got teams reportedly moving him off the draft board at least temporarily until they get those medical rechecks. It's just really heartbreaking because here was a guy that should be a top 10 pick and should be coming into the league and making an immediate impact as a leader and the linebacking core somewhere for some team running a 4-3 or 3-4. It didn't fucking matter. And now you're talking about a guy where he's going to, from Jump Street, have to redshirt 2016. He's not going to play then. Who knows if and when he will play. And it's all going to be about those medical rechecks in April, right before the draft. I can't remember a guy in recent times that's had so much importance placed on those medical rechecks. Yeah, there are guys every year in the draft that have medical issues and guys every year that have those medical concerns. I think back to Star Lotulelei in 2013 coming into that draft. You talk about him being a top 5 pick, but all of a sudden there's the talk about his heart condition and his heart's not pumping enough blood. It was pretty serious. Eventually the medical rechecks came through and satisfied enough people. The Panthers ended up taking him 14th overall. And, the rest, as they say, is history. But now you come to Jaylon Smith. If his medical checks are good, here's a guy that still could possibly go in the top 20, even with the knowledge for teams that he's not going to play at all in 2016, because the talent and the upside is there. It is there, especially in a draft class that frankly isn't all that great and is lacking for players that actually grade out as true first-rounders. So if his medical recheck comes back and says, the nerves are healing and that his recovery is going better and that he's going to be ready come 2017, somebody's going to want to gamble on him in the top 20. Somebody's going to have to because he's just too good of a talent with too much potential upside. Why sit there and take a lesser talent who has some bust potential where you look at Jaylon Smith, if he has bust potential, it's just because of that concern about that injury. I'd rather gamble on that superior upside personally. But if his rechecks on the medicals don't go well, you're talking about a guy that could go from having been a top 5, top 10 pick with maybe some conversation about going number 1 overall to he's not going in the first round to he might not even go day 2 to we're waiting to see who will actually gamble on him in day number 3 if anybody even chooses to. And it's just sad. To me, I look at it and I say, if his medicals say that there are still some concerns, even with that, I'm still fucking spending a day 2 pick on this guy. He's just too good, and he's just too talented, and the upside is just too tremendous to not gamble on it, even if he doesn't play for you a year, even if, frankly, he doesn't play for you for 2 years. Because, frankly, looking at a lot of these teams and what else they'd spend their 2nd or 3rd round picks on, they'll fucking suck and bust out of the league in a couple of years any goddamn ways. If I'm going to gamble on somebody in those rounds, I'm going to gamble on somebody who's got big-time NFL potential, and Jaylon Smith's got it. Believe that. And when it comes to me ranking him on my board, at this point in time, I've reserved judgment fully. If it sounds like his medical checks in April come back good, he's going to be one of the last players that I have a first-round grade on. If he was fully healthy, he would be in that top 10, maybe top 7 or 8 type of hemisphere. I do have him a little bit below Myles Jack, in case you were wondering. If all things were equal and everybody was healthy, Myles Jack didn't have the meniscus problem that he's recovering from, Jaylon Smith didn't have this horrible knee injury to come back from, all things equal, I still have Myles Jack just a tad bit above Jaylon Smith, but the margin is not that great. And to me, I still think if I'm a team picking towards the end of round number 1, I might gamble on him even if the medical rechecks are not that great. To me, if those medicals come back, I'm keeping my first-round grade on them. If they don't come back, then I'll still probably have a high second-round grade on them. This talk of somebody like a Jaylon Smith going in day number 3 because of the damage on his knee or the potential for long-term damage, so many of these other guys that they're taking in day 2 of the draft anyways are freaking projects and reaches and usually end up being bust. And I'm gonna bust on a guy with real legit Pro Bowl potential that everybody can freaking know and freaking see. Just a shame that it happened to Jaylon Smith this way. I wish him the best because this guy still to me, I'm going to hold out hope, still to me could be in 3, 4, 5 years one of the very best players to come out of this 2016 NFL draft class.